Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing the worst books that I read in 2021. Okay, so maybe it's not the worst books that I read, but I would say it's the most disappointing books that I read this past year, just because I was expecting a lot more from them, from either the hype or the synopsis or my own experience with the author and their writing, etc. But whatever the reason is, I was disappointed with these books. And I'm not going to go into so much detail in terms of what the books are about, because to be quite frank, you can actually just find them online very easily through Goodreads, Amazon, different websites, etc. Plus I have talked about them a lot during my videos throughout the years, so my wrap-ups, some of the reading vlogs, etc. So again, there is a lot of information at your disposal, just very readily just on my channel, for example. So anyways, I'm just gonna go into all the books that I did read this past year that I found incredibly disappointing. And I'm honestly kind of happy because I don't have that many books. I have, I think, 7 books, and I didn't even find 10 books that I was disappointed by. So that is kudos for me. Hopefully as the years progress, I will start narrowing this down to 0 books that I found disappointing, because, you know, the whole point of reading is to find books that I really enjoy. So anyways, let's just get started to the first book that I found very disappointing. And that first book will be Deadly Education. So I did talk about this a lot more in one of my videos, so I will link that above and down below in case you want to check that out. But this book itself was just not what I expected. I have read previous books by this author, which I absolutely adored. Spinning Silver, for example, was just so good. Like, it was beautiful, whimsical, all that stuff. This book was not the same. I felt like even though it's both fantasy, it doesn't have that kind of like whimsical element to it. It is literally about a school where people are being attacked by all these monsters and they have to fend for themselves and survive. That's literally what this book's about. So when you go into that, and pairing with Naomi Novik's like writing style, which is very like flowery and whimsical and kind of like lyrical in a way, it doesn't really mesh very well. And so for me, I just felt like the writing style for this book, first of all, was just not what I was expecting, and second of all, I felt very confused with what was going on with the plot itself. Like, there were a lot of elements about different magics that were being used, and I felt like none of them was very well explained. There's also some, like, for me personally, I didn't think it was racist, but there were a lot of discussions about racism in this book with some of the other groups. But as an Asian person, and some of the Asian parts in this book, I didn't find it racist. So I just felt like overall, like with all that combined, it was just a very disappointing read overall for me. Then this next book that I found very disappointing was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I felt like everyone was very excited about this book when this first came out, because I was like, oh my god, Hunger Games, it's like a childhood favorite, it's like, you know, nostalgia, all that stuff. And this book just didn't do it justice. It basically follows President Snow when he was a teenager, and it goes into like the history of the Hunger Games and when they were only at their 10th year. So it's, you know, very much in the past. And while I found like that historical element and some of Snow's like reasoning to be kind of like intriguing, like, oh, I wonder like how did he become the President Snow that we, you know, didn't really like in the Hunger Games. So I mean, part of me found it interesting. Like, I did think that there were elements with that I was like, oh, this is kind of fascinating. My biggest disappointment was the character, and end of the day, Snow is a very dislikable character. Like, no one likes him, no one cares much for him, and there are a lot of decisions that he made throughout this book that I was just like, what the fuck. Not only me, but like even the characters in this book, some of them did not condone his actions, especially like his friends and family. So I just feel like reading a book with such an unlikable character is just hard. And for a book, a series that's just so well beloved, I was like, I really did not really need to read this about this character, and I really didn't care more about this character. So it was just a very like unnecessary book, to be honest. And I did talk about this a lot more in my YA fantasy vlog, so I will link that above and down below if you want to check that out. But there's just a lot about this book that I was very disappointed by. Then this next book is Natalie Tan's Book of Luck and Fortune. This is one where I I don't know, I just felt like it was gonna be a lot of like food and a lot of like nostalgia for me as an Asian person, and just I don't know, I just thought there'd be like a lot more going for this book, but there wasn't. I also don't know why this book is categorized under as a romance when it really is not. Like the romance in this book was just so jarring, to be honest, and it was like it didn't need to be there, quite frankly. Like it was very much a insta love, but also not, because it was just awkward. So not a fan of the romance. The food element to it was good, but I also wasn't disappointed because I was expecting like recipes, like there were supposed to be recipes, and then I realized that there aren't actually recipes because none of the ingredients were actually like stated in terms of like how much you need. So it's very much a useless like unhelpful recipe out there. So I couldn't even like be like, oh, they're talking about this like crab dish that sounds so good, but how do I make it? I'll have to like find that out and like Google it myself, instead of just having it like in the books when they're talking about, they're literally going through the recipes, but the author decided to like skip out on actual like the necessary ingredients, the measurements for each ingredients for the recipes. So it's just like everything else is there but just that. So it's just like, it's hard, especially because I was reading this book kind of like, oh, maybe I'll find some cool new recipes, and you know, like I was also listening to an audiobook and I was like getting hungry for some of like the food that they were mentioning, like the dumplings, the crab dish. Like there's a lot that I was like, oh, this sounds so good. Couldn't really do anything about that. And plus there were also these really jarring mentions about these like magical realism that I felt like was unnecessary. I just don't know why they were there, to be honest. Like it was just a really weird book, and I was not a fan of the writing style either. Okay, then this next book was incredibly disappointing because I was expecting so much. I don't remember like when this book first came out or when I first heard about this book, but it's been quite some years, and I just remember everyone just raving about how great this book is and how riveting it is. I remember like someone famous had even like talked about it too, so people were like, oh my god, this person like recommended it as well. It was a while ago and I picked it up, and this is Devil in the White City, by the way. I picked up and it was not good. It was not just me too, like my sister, she picked up after me and she was like, oh, I have it on my list, because she also like, because she usually, when she gets books, she usually gets it from those like recommended lists, like stuff that was like very highly talked about. So not like me where I basically like scour like Goodreads and like Facebook and Twitter. Like she just stumbles upon them based on like how hyped they are. So she's more like your average reader, I guess. So she also found out this book and she's like, oh, this looks so interesting. And then I read it and I was like, no, this book sucks. And she was like, wait, really? And then she goes and picks it up. She's like, oh my god, this book is horrible. Like, why did you tell me to pick it up? And I'm like, no, I told you it was bad. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. It was just not a good book. It was like, first of all, this book basically follows a timeline, two different timelines between the serial killer of Chicago as well as the architect who designed the White City. And for some reason, other than the fact that they both were in the same time period, like the two stories literally had nothing to do with each other. So it's incredibly jarring the way how the author wrote about this very like detailed murder, kind of like murder mystery situation, and then jumping it suddenly to like buildings collapsing or like having some sort of mud, and so some of the stuff were like sinking into the ground, and I'm just like, this is so random, and it's just really hard to like get into a different mindset that is just so different. So because of that, I was not a fan of it, and I was just like, this is really hard to get into. Like I was a lot more invested with the murder aspect to it because it's literally a murder mystery. I feel like I was listening to like a podcast of a true crime, and I found that really fascinating, and then suddenly it would just jump into something that's so different. So that just always kept me like confused and disoriented me for sure. So I was not a fan, like definitely not a fan of this book at all. Then this next book is Permanent Record, and I have officially decided that Mary H.K. Choi is not the author for me. For some reason, her books and like her writing style just does not mesh with how I like my books, and the romances that she portrays are just not my cup of tea. I've heard really good things about this book, but unfortunately for me, I just don't think like her books and I just mesh at all. I do have another book of hers that I bought recently, which is Yoke, and I'm still gonna read it because I'm like, maybe third time's a charm, I have no idea. But as of right now, like every books I read from her have been just like okay. Let me know below if you are a Mary H.K. Choi fan or if you're not, like me, and just help me, you know, relate with that, because I feel like her books, from what I have understood now, is people either love her writing or they really don't like her writing, and I am definitely in the latter half because not a fan. Okay, then this next book is Majesty. So this is the one where I was debating about putting on here because she just announced a third book. So when I have first read this book, or when I first finished this book, I found out that there was no, you know, the conclusion, and the way how the book ends is so like abrupt. You're just like, there has to be another book. But at that time there was literally no mention about another book. Everyone was saying that this was the end to the series, and I was just like, there's no way, it's so abrupt, it's just like horrible, like what kind of ending is this? And then it was just announced that there is going to be a third book, a conclusion to this series. So with that in mind though, like I don't know if I should include this on this book. Like I'm still going to include it because I felt like at the time I was super disappointed, and like now I have like trepidation with going into the final book, because what if it's not really the final book, you know what I mean? Like so that was what I thought with Majesty. I thought that was gonna be the final book, and it was not. So I'm disappointed overall. I also felt like I loved the characters a lot less compared to how I liked them in the first book. The way how they were portrayed and their interaction with each other in the first book was just so good. Like I really liked some of the angst that they were having, and their like friendships and just their sibling bonds, etc. But in the second book, I felt more distant from them, and I just didn't really felt connected with any of the characters. I don't know if because a lot of time had passed between me reading American Royals and Majesty that I just felt like disconnected. But either way though, I just felt like when I finished the book I was incredibly disappointed, plus the fact that it was the ending, but not really, I guess, as of like a week or two ago. All right, then the last and final book that it was one of my most disappointing reads for 2021 is The Gilded Ones. I actually meant to do a book review on this book, but then it was so not good that I ended up giving it like 1 or 2 stars because I was just so disappointed. Like the writing style was not for me. Not only that, but the characters, like the growth was very jarring as well. It's one of those moments where the character was just like, oh, I'm totally normal, you know, whatever, and suddenly like she finds out that she is part of like something bigger than herself, that suddenly it's like her growth to becoming like strong is just like exponential, that it doesn't make sense. Like there was no like journey for her to get to that point. Like she literally, like it was like an overnight situation where she became like incredibly powerful, and I was like, this seems so unrealistic. There needs to be like some sort of like her doing training or like having some classes or something, you know, where it becomes more believable, or like at least have some time pass. But that was not the case, and I remember just feeling like it was maybe like a week or something and things just like completely did a 180, and I just didn't feel believable at all anymore. And that's when I got completely lost in the book. Like the book just lost me there. So overall, like it was just not a good book for me. I also didn't really care much for the plot itself, so yeah, overall just disappointing. That's all I can really say for that book. Anyways, that's what I can say for this video. Let me know below which books did you guys read for this past year that were very disappointing, or you know, just didn't live up to your expectations. Were there any books that I read this time around that are on your list as well, that you were also like, yeah, I agree, it was very disappointing for me? But as always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel. And if you'd like to see more content of me, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below, as well as hit the notification bell. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!